I would be an awful host to not give you the floor for what you feel, Brian, are your 3 keys to victory for the San Francisco 49ers coming across the country for a 4:25 kick at Hard Rock Stadium.
Yeah, love the later kick. West Coast kick time on the East Coast is
That
nice.
must be nice.
Yeah, that is
Must be nice.
I used, man, when I was younger, I used to be so jealous of the East Coast. I was like, dude, watching games at midnight, that's awesome. Then you get older, you become a dad, and you're like, oh man, I love this 10 a.m. football over here on the West Coast. And all the late games are over by 8:30 p.m. Still do a podcast. It's not even that late post game if your team's playing in prime time. But 1:30 is the right time to play a football game. Let's just be
local time or
local time. It's the right time. That's when football should be played, and so it's good for us. Not as good for you. A little bit later start time over there. But you mentioned the lines there with the FanDuel read. The 49ers are always favored, even with they're not playing good and they're banged up. And if you kind of have a game that seems like it's pretty equal matchup and equal records, and a game that might be somewhat of a pick 'em, you would expect the Niners are always favored in those games. So if FanDuel's jumping off the bandwagon for the 49ers, the Niners are in trouble right now, that they're not favored, and that means money is coming in on the Dolphins side. But for the 49ers, they have to get back to what they've been, and they've got to be able to make big plays, and they've got to win some matchups at the line of scrimmage. And I've been borderline appalled at how many games the 49ers haven't won up front this year, because that's what they were built on, especially on the defensive line. It was day one, like line one of the manifesto of John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, that we're going to build this thing around the defensive line. They even famously didn't scout Patrick Mahomes or the quarterbacks in the 2017 draft, because we're going to build this around the defensive line, and they drafted Solomon Thomas with their first pick. It was a big statement. And while that was a mistake, the statement and the plan I was on board with. And so watching how they haven't won up front in a lot of games, and especially late in games, they can't close it out even when they have a lead. It's been pretty distressing. So the 49ers have to be able to beat the Miami Dolphins offensive line, put some pressure on Tua, win some of those battles up front, with or without Dre Greenlaw. They have to be good with run fits. Obviously, Devondre Campbell's not going to be there either, because he walked out the door and got suspended. It's just been one of those seasons for the 49ers, by the way. Injuries and guys getting pneumonia and just everything you could possibly imagine. Holdouts. Everything seems to be working against the San Francisco 49ers. But now that they know who's around, and maybe a galvanizing moment with a team that knows they're not in it anymore, can you prove that you belong on the team next year, and can you be part of this thing? And you got to win some of those battles up front. So that's where it starts for me for the 49ers. Get some movement in the running game, make some plays, some catch and run opportunities, and the defensive line beating the Dolphins offensive line is the number one matchup I think the 49ers have to win.
And I think for me in Miami, you need to find a way to get Tyreek Hill involved offensively. And what I hope that means is not tempting the middle of the field, where Fred Warner, regardless of who the other linebacker is, Fred Warner is the kind of guy that's got a gravitational pull unlike any other linebacker in the NFL. So they have been tight end and running back reliant, and those guys often get their targets in the middle of the field. The Dolphins had done a really nice job, and I think Houston had between Kamari Lassiter and Derek Stingley, they had a couple of guys that were playing hard flats and they're really explosive and twitchy, and they kind of voluntarily gave up other portions of the field and did not surrender that those outside the numbers, inside of 10-yard throws that the Dolphins had done a really good job of taking those profits when other teams were giving them to them. I think that's the challenge for Miami is middle of the field. We know you're going to try to take your shots in there, but you have to stay on schedule and get your best player the ball in a way that if that's going to play into what San Francisco is probably expecting and banking and constructing much of their plan to do the way that the Texans did, how else can you get Tyreek Hill the ball? I think that's the big question for them that they're going to need to answer if they're going to have a shot in this game, especially because of the pass rush ability that they have. I have no idea who's going to be playing tackles. Like Mike McDaniel left it open for it to be both Kendall Lamb and Teron Armstead, who both missed last week. And if this is it for Teron Armstead, I'm sure he's not going to want to start a game against the Jets, leave after 3 plays in the first possession, and then surrender his job to a rookie in Patrick Paul and ride off into the sunset, and that be the way that he goes out. So I've got no idea who's playing, but if it's not those guys in particular who can hold up in pass protection, then finding where are the free access throws on time. That's going to be the thing I think that is going to be most important for Miami.
What happened with Jaylen Waddle this year? And I'm asking this mostly as a fantasy owner of his, and he became a guy. So I fully expect now that I was out of the playoffs that he's going to play and end up having some huge game against the 49ers, right? So what's going on with his injury situation, and what happened with him this year, being a guy that had a couple of good games, but it seemed like he was just an afterthought in the offense.
Yeah. So his after catch production was down a little bit, and it was also down from the previous year in which he led the league with 18.1 yards per catch in 2022. It felt like, aside of the 4 games in which they just had a non-functional passing offense, and they couldn't do anything. And Brian, when I say anything, they could not hand the ball off from me to you 2 yards away from each other. Like, that's how bad it was. If you remove that block of the season, though, he was on pace for the same amount of targets as what he had the previous season. And he was close to the same yards per target amount. But they took the Tyreek Hill push for 2K yardage thing, and they split that yardage between Tyreek and Devon Achane and Jonnu Smith. And as a result, teams were still really committed to, we're going to play press on the 2 guys outside that are the speedsters. And it led to more big spots and more big space for the other players. So it was good that they anticipated that and invested in those positions. But teams have been slow to adjust with how they've played against it. And they've been continuing to give that free access. And that's been the biggest area of growth for Tua Tagovailoa this year is, and I had this critique going all the way back to when he came out of Alabama. Dude, take easy completions when they give them to you. And, so much of the offense last year was predicated on those 15-yard inbreakers that they ran, and they ran it into the teeth of the defense at times, and it got guys lit up. And you saw that against Grant Dubose, where they inverted into a Tampa 2, and they had the high post safety who just stood there, and he drove on it, and Grant Dubose had a really scary injury with that. So it's been a little bit more distribution-based. It sounds like he's day-to-day. He did not practice on Wednesday, but Mike McDaniel left the door open, just kind of got leg whipped and rolled up on, trying to peel back down and block on a safety that was coming down in the run game. So, but I mean, he had 2 of the 3 previous games before Houston. He went for 8, 144 and a touchdown and 9 for 99. So it was starting to, like, everything was coming together and looked like he was going to have his big blow up spots. And then of course gets hurt against Houston.
Mike McDaniel's not on the hot seat, is he? Because I was interested to see that there's maybe a GM change happening, but head coach is safe over there?
I would assume so. I would assume Mike has enough good graces. Now, if they're catastrophic the last 3 games, I think you maybe get into opening the door for that conversation, but they're very collaboration-based, and the general manager that's been there, Chris Greer, he is so collaborative that he molds his own identities to whatever coach he has to an umpteenth degree, that if Mike says we don't need to worry about guards and, Skylar Thompson's been in the system for 2 years, we don't need to worry about a backup quarterback. And those things come up and bite you in the rear. Like, you can only take so many of those L's before you're the guy that rubber stamps everything. And it's like, okay, maybe we need somebody who's going to push back on you a little bit more and actually be a little bit more collaborative and just saying, instead of saying, yeah, whatever you want, let's do that. So I would assume Mike is safe. I would expect if things, maybe they run the table, we can get some momentum and they feel really good about where they're at next year. But I would expect this year for Mike McDaniel specifically, if there is a general manager change, there will be pressure on him next season at a minimum.